Hello again. So this is episode 7 of the Fragile Existence Dev Diary. I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, or it would feel like that given what I'm currently presenting to you. I had originally said that I was going to leave the procedural generation of the planets until much later, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to just get on with it, because trying to make the interaction between the ships and the units, going down to the planets and building things on the planet, it didn't make sense to not have a more established structure for the planets in place. Like, I would need to be able to know when I'm clicking on the planet what it is actually going to be, what is at that location, how does a unit move from one point to another on the planet, what stops or impedes the unit moving around. So what would be what would a mountain be? Is it a game object? Is it just a deformation of a mesh? How do I tell where a unit can and can't move on the planet's surface? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed to work from the planet upwards. So obviously when I started this project, it was all about the ships, making the ships move around in orbit, and the planets were very much an afterthought. But what I've developed now is a entire sort of splinter off from the main project. This is my planet generator. Okay, so I played around with quite a few tutorials that I found on YouTube and online, and various different ways of doing this. This is certainly not feature complete, but it's a good start. I came up with the idea that I wanted to base it around a cube, so 6 faces. This is actually a procedurally generated mesh, and what we can do is improve the resolution, which increases the amount of triangles or the amount of quads on each face. And by doing a little bit of programming trickery, what we can do is create a sphere from a cube. So as we lower the resolution again, we're changing the amount of triangles, and we can go as high as we really want, but it obviously uses more CPU to process the mesh, the higher the resolution. We can change the radius just by changing how far we want the mesh to be generated away from the center point. Okay, so not so exciting so far. What I have here is I have 4 tabs: continents, terrain, peaks, and the atmosphere. So far I've already implemented the continents feature, and the way this works is it uses a Simplex noise function. And what I can do is actually produce continents by changing the 4 main settings. So you see here we've got very low land density. As we increase that, the continents, and I appreciate the color is not implemented just yet. I implemented it in an editor and scriptable object version of this, but this is running in-game in project. And so I'm yet to add the color bar. That'll be down here, and we'll be coloring the terrain based on height. So if you imagine that these bits sort of sticking up are the continents, and the bits below can be the seabed, or where the water can be positioned. And so what we can do is increase the land density, and we can increase the land complexity. And so this allows us to produce a rich sort of assortment of different terrain types, continent types. We can increase the sharpness of each of these little bulges, so it sort of has a much sharper edge around the continent. And we can actually increase the height as well. So we can have lumps that go much further away from the center of the planet, and we make it more complex. We can obviously create some quite intriguing shapes. And this could end up being sort of a pattern for moons, or for rocky worlds like this, with sort of loose sort of cratering shapes. We could give different colors to the different patterns, and of course we can add the sea. Now the resolution on that sea is quite low because we need to pump this all the way up. In game it would be quite high, but in the editor it's best to keep it quite low so that we can quickly make edits to the mesh itself. And we can also change the sea height. So the height will actually go as high as the maximum height. So the higher this is, the more sort of seabed we have. And I think this has got potential for use in game. I don't see why not. The sea height can be adjusted, and we can actually have planets get more flooded, or for whatever reason the ocean could go down. And I'm quite happy with the way the continent system's working at the moment. You can add a random seed by changing the X, Y, Z of the noise itself. And there's quite a bit you can do with it. Personally, I think I'll be having the height quite low, having sort of density around about here, complexity in this sort of region, and a quite sharp continent sort of shape, and then the sea maybe a little bit higher. And it gives it a semi-realistic look. You probably want the complexity a little higher, maybe lower density. There we go. It's vaguely Earth-like. Maybe there's a bit too many continents. We can bring the sharpness down as well. And then if we put the resolution up, we can see it looks quite clean. So the idea is that these sort of relatively flat plateaus represent where the units can be situated and where they can move. And what I can do is store data for each vertices on the sphere, and then by saving what it is, or rather what height it is, I'll be able to determine whether it's land or whether it's a sea location, or whether later on we'll actually add peaks. And so that will be points that you can't move between. So I think it's a pretty good start, and you can actually save and load here. So I'm going to load one that I did earlier, and that's just a sort of moon-like thing. If I change these settings, I have the sea, make it a massive world, and then load it again, you see we have some persistency there. That was actually quite tricky to implement, and I'd never actually done any kind of serialization before, so I spent quite a bit of time looking into that as well. At the moment it just saves to the same file, but what I'm currently working on is allowing you to name the planet, and then you'll actually be able to bring up a load dialog here, which will, when you save it under that name, it'll list all the different planets. I also want to do a little sort of like a screenshot, or a thumbnail, which involves using a render texture to render this image from a separate camera, so it won't have this in, and it'll have a little thumbnail image that allows you to select which planet you want to load up. So I haven't implemented terrain, peaks, or the atmosphere yet, but it's just a case of using different combinations of noise patterns. And I've already, in editor, I've come up with some ideas for how the terrain and the peaks are going to look. And it actually uses a mask of the continent shape. So you'll only be able to put terrain on the flat plateaus, because the noise it adds on extra elevation to the points that were produced in the continents tab. So that data is output and fed into the terrain and peaks, so you don't end up with mountains in the middle of the ocean. They'll actually be in the right places. And the terrain is just to give extra sort of character to the flat regions, but will essentially keep it flat, just add a bit more detail. But I'm pretty happy with how this is working, and obviously the sort of next steps is to implement this in Fragile Existence itself, so port it into my my main program at runtime preferably, maybe even port the whole planet generation script and as an asset into the main project folder, and then we'll actually be able to procedurally generate planets, Earth-type planets, in the main program, and then we can start working on sending units down. So I'm pretty happy with that. I also intend to do, so up here you'll be able to select the planet type. There will be terrestrial and there'll be gas planets. The gas planet will be more shader based, so this is deforming a mesh, and I think you can get the full range of rocky and terrestrial planets out of this. And the actual gas planets will be just shader based, so it'll have rotating elements and it'll look volumetric. But I mean, that's really what I've been working on these past 2 weeks, or rather I moved out of my university accommodation the first week, so I wasn't very productive then, but this week I've got this going, and it's a step that I thought I was going to be delaying until much later, so I'm happy to have got it done. or I've started to get it working. I really want to get the color generator in here, and the next step will actually, for this system at the very least, will be that you save this mesh, and then I'm actually going to allow for hand crafting. I'd like to do some deformation of the mesh itself, like letting you sculpt it a little bit. But what I'm really thinking is placing game objects so that you can make the planets more interesting. So I'm actually now thinking that I don't want to go down a purely procedural route. I want to be able to procedurally generate planets and then be able to add manually add detail by adding game objects onto the planet's surface. So we can make them more interesting, make them more sculptured, give them a bit of a story and a background. Been a pretty good week. I'm keen to get going with it. And thanks for watching.